Howard Tullman, ladies and gentlemen. Howard, thank you so much for carving out the time for Fireside Chicago today.
Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've been looking virtually. That's right. You're in Chicago. I'm in the western suburbs. It's great that we're able to connect in this way, but I think it's part of the times. I mentioned to this before we hit the record button. I really appreciate you coming on board. But before I leapt into entrepreneurship, I was a major consumer of business content, articles, podcasts, videos, and I've read a lot of what you put out there. I've seen a lot of interviews about you, and I think over time I got the confidence to kind of just take the leap. And I think you're a little bit of a part of that. So the fanboy in me is excited to have you as a part of the show that I've created throughout this pandemic.
Great,
so,
I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So let's jump in. So the Chicago tech scene. This show is all about Chicago, jobs, growing the ecosystem. I think probably maybe more than a lot of the folks that we've had on the show before. You've seen every iteration of Chicago. Can you describe, when you started maybe your first few companies, what the Chicago tech scene was like, and then maybe take us through the last, couple decades and how it's increased to what it is today?
Yeah, I would say, so my first, my first company started in about 1975. So to give you some idea. I think there really wasn't a tech scene in Chicago in the sense that we understand it now. And the difference is there just wasn't a startup community. I mean, there were technology businesses, but they were Motorola. They were larger organizations, which were very traditional, old tech kind of businesses. And it was almost impossible to get financing for a new idea or for a startup. I mean, there was stuff going on elsewhere, but it was very tough. And I would say from 80 to 90 or something, it was a very challenging time. We had just the beginnings of a few venture firms, but mostly those grew out of the venture arms of the banks. And what was interesting is that one of the big drivers of the availability of both private equity and venture money in Chicago was how screwed the big banks were. I mean, Illinois was a state that didn't permit branch banking for a long time, and as a result, some of the biggest banks in Chicago couldn't really build their base in the way that companies and banks in other cities were able to do it. And of course, that's why today we don't have First National Bank anymore, and we don't have American National Bank, and we don't have, we have the shell of a few of these other ones, the private bank, it's now CIBC, and maybe Northern Trust is still around, but none of these are players. The people that were active in those banks that wanted to do something more with their lives spun out. So Stan Golder started one of the first big firms, Golder Toma, which is now, spawned Bruce Rauner and his team, and Carl Toma and his team, and all manner of different things. And that's true. If you look at the background of the 4 or 5, the guys that I think are the major venture players in Chicago, every one of them came out of First National or Continental Bank or one of these places, got their first fund started, typically with family money from the banking clients that they had. None of these guys were independently really wealthy guys. And that also restricted what the appetite was that they had for venture. They were not going to be balls to the walls, let's roll the dice on space shuttles. They were going to say, what's new in food? Because we have, organizations here that they were familiar with. And by the way, their investors were familiar with. So it was not till, 10 years on or so that those firms started to say, our returns are not accelerating in the same fashion that we're seeing on the coast, and we have to start being more sort of aggressive and open more to risk. Now, for 10 years, Chicago investment, maybe for 20 years, Chicago investment took a real hit because the rap was we just didn't want to fail. We were just too conservative. And a venture fund operates on a power law. You have 8 failures and 2 home runs. And, different formulation is maybe you have 3 winners and 3 living dead and 4 that, are totally gone. But, the appetite and the willingness to fail was something that it took a while for that to come into the culture. In the same way, frankly, that today entrepreneurs are rock stars. A few years ago, entrepreneurs were guys who couldn't get a good job. And by the way, if you went into a bank and said, I'm an entrepreneur, they were like, we're not lending you any money.
Too risky, right?
Went in and said, I'm a lawyer, any lawyer in the world, that's fine. We'll lend you money. So entrepreneurs have become accepted. Everybody in the world now, athletes and artists and rock stars, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Whether they know what that means or not is a different question. So you had that convergence. You had entrepreneurs coming into their own. You had an increased appetite for risk. You had the growth of the venture funds. And then to a very modest extent, you had sort of the first wave of some true technology companies that kicked off in Chicago. And those companies became sort of the forerunners of the technology, space. So U.S. Robotics was a good example of that. Using Cowell. Interestingly enough, both Rich Melman and Larry Levy have been long-term investors in all kinds of businesses, tech businesses and everything else. But their entire, sort of fortunes came from, the restaurant business. Or Gordon Siegel, Gordon Crate and Barrel. Gordon is a very, very active investor, even today, in medical technology and in other kinds of things like that. That all grew out of the Crate enterprise. And interestingly enough, in those 3 industries, if you look at Larry and Levy, the Levy organization, or you look at Lettuce, or you look at the Crate, none of these companies brought technology into their own businesses. I mean, now a different story would be somebody like Ad Properties. So you have Thad Wong. Thad has a guy who has been a venture investor in technology and startups, very supportive, sweet guy. And they have made really good use of technology. Ad Properties has grown in part and scaled because they incorporated technology into their businesses. But to tell you the truth, that's a 20th, sort of 2005 to 2015 kind of thing, as opposed to earlier than that. So, and lastly, and I have to give credit. I mean, first of all, you have 1871, which put the city and really technology on the world map. I mean, being the #1 incubator. I don't think that would have necessarily been possible. Certainly, JV was a part of that. But Rahm was one of the greatest, tech boosters we ever had. The current mayor is a complete bust. I don't think she even cares about business or technology. But you had to go out of your way. You had to be an advocate. It wasn't enough to be, a little supportive. It was, Rahm was out there pitching and telling the story of some of our startups, and that helped a lot.
I think, I'm in the jobs business. I understand how labor dynamics and those salaries affect local economics quite a bit. And I've said it before, I'm Chicago through and through. It's a shame to see all the layoff activity that's happening really in all sectors, but in the tech space, and the importance of technology jobs in Chicago for the long term. I don't think people really understand it. Like, think of like Dayton, Ohio, or if you've ever been to like downtown Detroit, Michigan, like see what happens when like a thriving industry scales back or goes away, and how that affects other things. It's horrible, right? And I think, it's so interesting hearing you talk about, the 80s when the banking mindset was like, oh, my baseline is 3 to 5% returns. and my risky was 7 to 8% returns, whereas modern day, Silicon Valley, or maybe at least last year,
Sure.
was tossing money around. Let's see what hits
Sure.
out of my 1 to 10. How have you seen, and you do a lot of investing yourself, but how have you seen the evolution of the VC, the micro VC? You mentioned some of the longer lasting firms, and then what effect does that have on the ecosystem?
Well, I think we had a lot of people make a lot of money in the last 10 years, and they've become venture investors. But they're fairly crappy venture investors because they're entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are not particularly good investors. I mean, the last thing you want to have on your board of directors are a bunch of entrepreneurs, all of whom think they're smarter than you. And, you can't have everybody be aggressive. I say, every successful company has an accelerator and a brake. And if the entrepreneur is crazy, you better partner with somebody who is a good financial person who can tell you no and who you listen to, at least occasionally. So we've had a glut the last 5 or 10 years of money. I mean, angel investors, people that read and heard that this was where a doctor could make a lot of money. I mean, I'd say 10 years ago, they would buy a 3-flat in the city, doctors, lawyers, dentists, and think that that was going to be easy money and they were going to rent it out. And then they discovered that unless you're prepared to do the repairs and be the landlord truly, then whoever the contractor is that talked you into buying the 3-flat, he actually is the guy who's going to profit. And so they moved from real estate, which, by the way, even the best real estate was highly passive and it wasn't bragging rights. There was nothing to say, I own a crappy strip mall on Roosevelt Road. Whether it was lucrative or not, they wanted to be in what was hot, what people were talking about, what their kids were interested in. But that wave of easy money, didn't improve the quality of the overall investment situation. And frankly, if you look, the record of success in Chicago overall is about the same as that of a well-run venture portfolio. What that means is, we have plenty of pretty substantial failures. We have plenty of stories that, we don't want to talk about Groupon, anymore. We don't want to talk about some of these things that Trunk Club is another one, and so, but they were able to get money. And so look, I think that there's going to be, coming out of the pandemic, there's going to be a level of scale and a little bit more reluctance to just do every crazy part of that. Now, having said that, not good at all for the central business district. You talk about the Renaissance Center in Detroit and some of these places. I mean, I have 10 or 11 companies, all of whom have 50 to 100,000 square feet of space in the city, downtown in the city, and all they want to do is get out of that space, and they think they can get by with 10,000 square feet. And they probably can, one, because they've discovered that they can virtualize a lot of their employees, two, because they just don't want to have that nut. They just don't know how long it's going to take to rebuild their business. And so they are going to be smaller, smarter, more distributed. And the technology is enabling a lot of that, which is the good news. But it's also going to be very, as you said, the headcount issues are going to be substantial. I mean, businesses are just going to be 40% of the size that they used to be.
It's amazing to see, a city like Chicago over the long haul. There's substantial manufacturing and distribution. We're right in the center of the country, which is good. Yeah. I grew up in the western suburbs, and like Tell Labs and Lucent and
Sure.
like the telecom boom, like that employed a lot of the families that I went to like middle school and high school with around here. And then you have like pharmaceutical, med device, but it's really like that future. It's technology jobs across the world.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that that's represented here.
Well, one of the things, that should give you some hope is that the pandemic taught us a couple of lessons, but one of the lessons was we better have supplies and resilience and redundancy much more localized than before. So I call this the difference between, just in time, which is the way that we, for the last 25 years, we stole it from the Japanese, and we were all about just in time. The inventory would arrive the morning that you needed it on the line.
Lean Six Sigma.
Yeah,
right.
and you wouldn't have one extra bolt that wasn't needed. And then along comes the pandemic, and we don't have our own PPE, we don't have our own supply chains, we don't have anything. So I think the next few years, and by the way, this is what Amazon is doing. I mean, Amazon is buying warehousing capability around every major city in the country and building these huge warehouses. There are 11 of them just in Chicago. And I think what's going to happen is businesses are going to say, you know what, I want to have some of my critical supply closer to me. I want to do 3D printing, but that's a ways off. So warehousing, local supply, some of the areas you described, some of the facilities that are sitting in the suburbs are going to be repurposed, and many of them may be high-end or high-tech warehouses that will permit businesses to store critical and essential supplies much nearer to the home than used to be. So that'll create delivery jobs. It'll create some very interesting issues about electric vehicles and autonomous trucks and things like that. So
drones dropping off packages and things. It's exciting to think about in a way. And it's also, it's amazing to see what big shifts happen and how everybody else and everything else reacts to that. So for example, in the jobs space, in the candidate space, there was a huge shift for companies to be downtown.
Right.
You got to be downtown. You got to be right by the metro in case you want to pick up people from the suburbs.
Yeah.
You got to be right by the green line, red line, blue line. And you couldn't compete because it was a war for talent. You couldn't compete unless you had operations there, right? Now, that's what's going to happen, right?
That's certainly what they said. And McDonald's is probably the poster boy for that. McDonald's and Discover, I think, are the two. Discover literally had to put in a rule that said you couldn't work in the downtown office. You had to drag your ass out to Bannockburn or something, unless you had a really good reason. And McDonald's, experimented with about 10,000 square feet and then built a facility down here. And the thought, just as you said, was you can't get young creative talents, and they don't want to commute, and they want to be in a place where they can have all the rest of their activities and the rest of their life as well. That's going to change. I think that's going to change. I think that we talked about venture capital before. I don't know where most of the VC firms are if you really did a survey. But for sure, a bunch of them figured out that if you live in Glencoe or Highland Park or Lake Forest, that you might as well have your offices on Skokie Boulevard, in the north side, which is 10 minutes from your house, but also 10 minutes from your club and 10 minutes from your kid's school. And why would you drag your ass down to the Sears Tower and wonder how Sears is going to get 20,000 people a day safely into a building with social distancing? So a lot of them have moved. A lot of them are like, I don't need this. Just like the banks, by and large, concluded they didn't need these giant lobbies and all these big facilities themselves. So a lot of them have abandoned some of those, downtown locations as well. So we'll see. Where the workforce wants to work is going to be a significant, change again.
The labor market has always been a kind of a leading indicator. We had financial issues, like we got to do layoffs as quickly as possible to stay alive. And then there's like residential real estate that's a little bit of a lag because someone has to make a selling decision for pricing to take effect. Commercial real estate, there's like 3, 5, 10-year contracts for these things. So, there's a potential where COVID come and goes, or it just slowly deteriorates over time.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think the landlords made a serious mistake. They should have early on said to their tenants, we'll give you 3 months without rent, and we'll tack it onto the back of your lease. So they did exactly what you said, which is they protected their rent roll for those future years. Now they've got a bunch of people who are like, you screwed us. You didn't give us any relief. And as soon as we can get out of this thing, we're going to get out of this thing. And not only that, but, we're going to exercise whatever capabilities we have to sublet, and we're going to make your life miserable. And some of the big downtown buildings have 4 and 5 floors of some of their major sort of showcase talent companies, all looking to get out. So I think that real estate is going to be under a lot of pressure, commercial real estate. Now, if you talk to people in general, I think they would tell you that suburban real estate, which was dead for a few years, the recent years, is picking up because people are like, maybe it's not a bad thing not to live in an elevator building with another 10,000 people, and maybe it's nice to have some space and have a pool and do these amenities. So I think the market has picked up. I also think that because Francis Parker and Latin, in the midst of this craziness, actually raised their tuition, I think that young couples, like yourself, are saying, I don't know, private school, $50,000 a year or something for multiple kids. I moved to Glencoe or Highland Park, and the school system is free, even if there's real estate taxes. And by the way, this mayor is going to make sure that nobody in the city escapes real estate taxes either. So I think that the idea that which used to be the case, I think 10 years ago, you'd get your kids to preschool age, and then you'd move to the burbs, and I think that some of that may be coming back because of a lot of these sort of considerations, private school being only one of them.
It's so interesting. Yeah, it'll be very interesting. Obviously, we need a solution for COVID to let any future kind of settle into what it's going to be. But
you talk about the job market. One of the other things that's important, and this goes to critical mass. I wrote a couple of pieces about this, but I told some of our big tech companies, this goes back 8 or 10 years, that they needed to jointly bring some talent in from the West Coast for recruiting purposes, and make it clear that you weren't single-threaded, because it's very scary. In San Francisco today, still, or Seattle, there's 100 jobs, that you can jump from. And if you were trying to get a guy to move here and you were single-threaded, you were the only offer, the only company he looked at, a lot of those people didn't move. They were like, no, it's too risky. It might not work out. And then what do? I'm stuck in Chicago. If they had come and if they literally had said, look, we've got Groupon, but we've also got Grubhub, and we've also got, 6 other companies that are worth taking a look at. We never really developed that level of comfort of having a safety net, of having a lot of different options. But that was something that we needed to be doing if we wanted to get some of this talent to come here.
Yeah, mobilizing talent, keeping Midwestern or University of Illinois or Northwestern talent in Chicago should be at the forefront. I think maybe because I'm in it, I think it's underappreciated, but I feel like to thrive and prosper, we need jobs and businesses here in Chicago that are long lasting and sustaining, specifically technology jobs over time. If I think I'm stealing an idea from maybe Wade Burgess. We talked about this, but if we had all the time in the world, there's something there to, think about the future of work. Software developers are really hard to find, and there's really no recession for software developers right now.
Well, listen, the University of Illinois is slowly sneaking into Chicago, and that's going to be a game changer. I mean, the DPI project with the U of I and with Tel Aviv University, and in the city, competing head to head, by the way, with IIT, with UIC. I'm sure none of those guys are happy to have the University of Illinois here, but that's always been the only knock on them, is that they were stuck in friggin' Bloomington Normal or Champaign, whatever it is. As soon as they say that you can go to school in the city of Chicago and get the benefit of IIT training, that's going to create a talent pool directly in Chicago that I think is going to be significant. I mean, there are kids at University of Illinois who don't even know where Chicago is, and they come here for their 4 years, and then they go back to China or they go back to the West Coast, and we've done a lousy job of really marketing Chicago as an employment center to those kids. And exactly what you said, the talent flight has been really substantial.
Internships, work while you're going to school, all that
Summer
stuff.
abroad, the joke about summer abroad was summer abroad could be in Chicago for these kids. They wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah, right.
They could be in Italy or they could be in, downtown Chicago.
That's right. Well, last kind of topic before we finish up. You had some really interesting predictions around like the future of investment in technology and where you think the returns will be, and what some of the the older playbooks around what to invest in. I thought we could rehash that a little bit and maybe how that's changed a little bit for you, how that's accelerated or decelerated because of COVID. But I think to paraphrase what you were saying, hey, we've been investing in SaaS companies the last 10 years, and to make things a little bit more convenient, you basically said like everything's pretty damn convenient right now. Like it would have to be a huge lift in convenience or productivity to make it worth my while.
Yeah, I think we've gone about as far as you're going to go on phase one, access, convenience, and speed. But time is going to be and continue to be the prime driver. So, it's all about time. I mean, the truth is time is more valuable today than money. I mean, because we want to save time. We don't really care. I mean, Amazon Prime is, all of these services are about, you want to pay $1 or $2 more and have it here this afternoon or tomorrow. Of course, who cares? So time is going to continue to be a huge driver. What I look for is, first of all, if you look at what's happened to texting and messaging, you discover that email is dying. I mean, email is slow and overloaded, and texting is immediate and it's always there. And we respond in 90 seconds to text and roughly 90 minutes to emails, if at all. So you've got this acceleration of information flow. The two things that I'm working on and most interested in right now are voice. You have to understand how powerful voice controls are. Voice is going to be the operating system of our homes and our cars more and more. It's not just Alexa, do this. It's like Alexa, do everything, or Siri, or Cortana, or Bixby. But right now there's more voice control in cars than telephone control, and that's just increasing. So voice is huge. The other thing that COVID has shown us, along with Apple, really, is we're going to see a lift.
I didn't understand that.
My Alexa just went off. Sorry. Cancel. Alexa, cancel.
That's hilarious.
The big lift that we're going to see is in telemedicine. I think we've also discovered that we're perfectly happy to go to Walgreens and get a flu shot. Perfectly happy. 3 years ago, if you would have said some clerk, at Walgreens is going to give me a flu shot, I would have said, you're out of your mind. I'm going to my fancy internist and beg for an appointment, and I'll probably have the flu by the time I get in, and I'll pay a bunch of money. Now you drive by not just immediate care places, but every CVS, every Walgreens, and they're like, it's free and it's immediate and it's at your convenience and all that stuff. So that was the beginning, but the truth is that we're going to have, the real growth is going to be in remote monitoring of everything. I mean, we're going to wear these devices. It's going to tell people more and more. It'll tell diabetics when they're, need to, administer what they need. It'll monitor all kinds of different bodily performances. And we're all going to really not just accept that. I mean, this is going to be game changing in a lot of respects in important ways. So I think that's coming. So voice is coming, remote monitoring is coming, this idea of breaking through. We talked about attention being the new currency, completely the case. I mean, what you pay attention to is all that matters now, which is going to make it so hard for startups to break through. The noise is out there, the platforms are out there. You have a new idea, you might as well just, I call it build to be bought, because the likelihood that you're going to be the next anything is zero.
Right.
The likelihood, if you're the most successful new idea in the world in the next year or two, it'll be because you've got one of the big companies to buy you. And then the last thing that's going to be off the charts is cybersecurity. So Keeper and passwords and all of this kind of stuff, because this is another COVID message. I mean, if your kid is using your computer at home, your work computer at home, I mean, all bets are off. And so all the security issues, all the hacking, all the stuff that's going on, it's going to be enormously, problematic for us.
Every giant leap forward in technology, there's another opportunity for fraud and, different tricks and things like that. There's two like segments that I feel like still have a lot of inefficiency. And one would be like the regulated industries.
Government industries. Yeah.
Government, like medicine, as you mentioned, like there's a lot of inefficiency.
The two giants are education and medicine. I mean, those are the two big ones. Now, we could streamline easily government procedures. I mean, we could make it so easy to get your new license, so easy to get this. But, the barrier there is not technology. The barrier is those are patronage jobs, and there's no mayor in the country who wants to get rid of 200 of their employees because we can we can renew 100% of everything that we need in our lives digitally now. So the impediment to government efficiency improvements are the people issues. They just won't get rid of the workforce because those could be enormous things. Now, on the other hand, you have these assholes trying to kill the post office, and they're taking machines out that were labor-saving machines, but none of those employees are complaining because they made it possible for them to do their job. Mm-hmm. So I think the post office issues are going to be significant, and whoever the next president is, they're going to be significant. But yeah, that's for sure. Regulated industries, in theory, for sure, are an opportunity area, and government services fit in that category.
Might not be the best investment based on some of the headwinds that you had described. Yeah. And then the other one is, there's certain industries that are still like human manual decision making, right? And I think it's coming. Like I think of like recruitment and talent acquisition. It's still very like manual. Like, hey, Howard said he's looking for a job. I know 2 people that are hiring right now. I'm going to introduce Howard to these 2 people. Okay, like that changed the direction of my life. Whereas like, hey, there's something to be said about my interests and my vision that I have, my career map for myself, my ambitions, and then a company's, what they're looking for.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how. I mean, Indeed is doing a lot of advertising. People think that that broadens the pool of opportunities. But I would bet that most of the people would tell you that they got their job through some kind of personal connection. It's just the way the world is going to work for the next umpteen years. And I don't know how that's going to be improved, but it'll be interesting to see. And by the way, I also think that there are gatekeepers there that have been around for a long, long time. Some of these expensive firms that really do generally a crappy job, the headhunters, the true headhunters. And I don't know how much longer they're going to be permitted to charge the kind of fees and, operate in the way that they historically have. That's a very cumbersome, expensive proposition.
Most brokerage businesses have been disrupted by either changing the model or technology. And you're right. That's one that's just kind of standing there.
Well, look, I mean, when you look at Schwab and you look at E-Trade and these companies, I mean, I wouldn't want to be a real estate broker. I wouldn't want to be a stockbroker right now. I mean, because the value add is just not apparent at all. So
I'll probably use Redfin, I would imagine, for my next home purchase. I found my last house on Redfin and it still paid the fees. So Howard, this has been so, it's been awesome. I appreciate it. Open talking shop. This has been great, kind of going back and forth on various topics. I'd love to have you back at a future date if you're open to it. But, for listeners that want to check out anything about what you're doing, your firm, where can they learn a little bit more about you?
I think the best place is either just my speaker website, which is howardtullman.com, or my personal blog, which is tullman.blogspot.com, or just tullman.com. I mean, I figured because I have 5 brothers and sisters, that I needed to own Tullman so that they are all screwed. There are all variations on that, and they hate it. But yeah, just my last name will get the job done.
Excellent. Howard,
Okay?
thank you so much. We'll
Good.
talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye bye.